They say your worst nightmare can begin in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. For Malcolm, a tech consultant and quiet homeowner, it started with a few blinking lights on his router and ended with sirens blaring, neighbors watching, and a stranger trying to erase his identity with a single phone call. But what no one expected, what no one was ready for, was what the police would discover once they got there. Malcolm had just finished a long call with a client when he noticed the Wi-Fi acting up again. For weeks, he'd been dealing with unstable internet in his newly purchased home, a quiet property in a largely suburban neighborhood. He'd lived there for just under 6 months, long enough to be known by a few neighbors, but apparently not well enough by all. He stepped outside that day with his laptop and a tool kit, planning to reset the network and check the external line. The router was set up in the garage, where the cable entered the house. With his hoodie on and wires in his hand, he began working, unaware that eyes were watching him from the window across the street. 2 houses down, Karen Whitmore sipped on her midday chamomile tea and stared through her blinds. A self-declared neighborhood guardian, Karen always saw herself as the last line of defense between them and the safety of her community. Her latest concern, Malcolm, she'd never formally met him. She just saw a young black man who drove a Tesla, wore headphones a lot, and didn't say he enough for her taste. And today, when she saw him crouched over wires near the side of his garage, tools in hand, she knew something was off. Karen picked up her phone and dialed 911. There's a suspicious man messing with the power lines. I think he's trying to tap into someone's Wi-Fi. No, I don't know which house he belongs to. He doesn't look familiar. He's acting strange. Meanwhile, Malcolm was humming a tune, tightening a connector. A small spark flickered, and the signal blinked steady. Satisfied, he stood up and stretched. Across the street, Karen was already updating the dispatcher. He's moving now. He might be leaving before you get here. Can someone come quickly? Police dispatch flagged the call with possible tampering, which automatically escalated the response. 2 squad cars were sent out. Malcolm returned inside and began reconnecting his devices. That's when he saw them. 2 patrol vehicles pulling up, one on the curb, the other blocking his driveway. He opened the doors slowly, a frown on his face. Can I help you, officers? One officer, young, stiff, and visibly unsure, stepped forward. We received a report of suspicious activity around the side of this house. This house? I live here, Malcolm replied, confused but calm. I was fixing my Wi-Fi line. The second officer, older and more relaxed, looked toward the garage and saw the open toolkit. Karen, by then, had walked out of her house, arms crossed, eyes blazing with a mix of fake concern and gloating pride. I told them, she called out. He was tampering with the wires. I didn't recognize him. We've had thefts around here. The younger cop looked at Malcolm. Do you have ID, sir? Malcolm nodded slowly. Sure, it's inside. May I? But before he could finish, a voice crackled over the older officer's radio. Be advised, property ownership records show this address under a Malcolm S. Warren. No priors. Registered property owner. The officer raised an eyebrow. Is that you? Yes. Malcolm Warren. I bought this house last year. Want me to show you the deed? But then the older officer paused. Something about the setup outside caught his attention. He walked around the side of the house, inspected the cable panel, then turned toward Karen. "Ma'am, you said you saw him tampering with public utility lines." "Yes," she insisted. "He was out there with tools." "That's not normal." The officer leaned in closer. "Funny, because those aren't utility lines. They're private ISP installations, and he was using professional-grade equipment." "You know what else is funny, Mom?" Karen blinked. "What?" "We ran the property. He's the owner. You're the one who just made a false report." And just like that, the energy shifted. The cop returned to Malcolm and asked, "Would you mind coming with us for a minute? Not for questioning. We just found something odd next to your router setup." Malcolm hesitated, then nodded. What they found in Malcolm's garage would take this situation from absurd to unbelievable. Malcolm followed the officers into the garage, trying to stay calm. What could they possibly have found near his router? This was his house, his equipment. But when one of the officers pointed to a small, black device tucked behind the cable line, hidden and blinking, Malcolm's stomach dropped. He had never seen it before. "Is this yours?" the older officer asked. Malcolm bent down, confused. "No, that's not mine." "What is it?" The officer carefully pulled it out using gloves. "Looks like a wireless signal sniffer, used for intercepting network traffic. This one's high grade. Not the kind you buy off Amazon." Malcolm was stunned. "Wait, you're saying someone planted a spy device on my network?" Karen, who had followed them up the driveway to snoop more, leaned in. "See, I told you he was up to something." The younger officer snapped at her. "Ma'am, please step back. This is a private property." The older officer turned to Malcolm. "We're going to sweep the area, see if anything else turns up. But this is serious. Do you have any idea who might have wanted to spy on your network?" Malcolm shook his head. "No. I work remotely. Mostly corporate contracts. Nothing illegal. I don't even socialize much." They continued scanning the garage, the driveway, the backyard. And that's when the second discovery made everyone freeze. Behind the garden hose reel, partly buried in the soil, was a small camera, rigged to point toward Malcolm's home office window. And it was still recording. The officers looked at each other. "This wasn't random," the younger one said. "Someone's watching him." Karen, arms folded, hissed through her teeth. "Maybe he set it up himself to fake something. You people always have a way of twisting things." That was it. Malcolm stepped forward, his voice calm but ice cold. "You people. Mom, you called the cops on me in my own house. You assumed I was a criminal because I was adjusting my own cables, and now that they found real surveillance equipment planted in my yard, you still think I'm the problem." Karen didn't respond, but her face tightened. The guilt hadn't hit her, just her pride. The officers conferred and made a call for a tech unit to secure the devices. One of them spoke to dispatch again, requesting a forensics team. Back inside, Malcolm sat on the couch, shaken. He couldn't help but think of all the times his connection had been acting strangely. Had someone been watching his screens? Listening. The older officer returned and lowered his voice. "Sir, I'm not saying this to alarm you, but this looks personal. Someone went to lengths to place these without you noticing. Whoever it was had access to your property and knowledge of where to plant devices." Malcolm's eyes narrowed. "Are you suggesting it might be someone who lives nearby?" "We're not ruling it out." Karen stood outside, pacing, talking to someone on the phone. Her voice carried, "I was trying to protect the neighborhood. Now I'm being treated like the bad guy." Meanwhile, the forensic team arrived and began scanning for fingerprints and signal sources. What they found made everyone tense up again. The Wi-Fi sniffer had been transmitting data to a secondary address just 2 blocks away. The signal logs traced to a home that had recently been listed as vacant, but the officers recognized the address. It belonged to a local property manager, someone who'd had access to dozens of homes in the area, someone who'd recently been fired for tampering with tenant devices. "Wet," Malcolm said slowly, piecing it together. "Are you talking about Dan Keller?" The older officer nodded. "You know him?" Malcolm leaned back, shocked. "Yeah, he used to manage this property before I bought it. He was furious when I canceled his security services. Said I was making a mistake. I didn't realize how deep his access ran." The pieces were falling into place. Dan Keller had installed hidden monitoring systems while managing the property. And now, even after Malcolm had bought it, he'd been spying, likely angry over losing the account or for reasons no one yet understood. As the officers made preparations to issue a warrant for Dan's home, Karen finally realized the gravity of what had happened. So he really owns this place, and someone was watching him. The younger officer turned toward her, deadpan. "Yes, Mom. And your call nearly let the real criminal get away." For once, Karen had no words. Back inside, Malcolm sat in stunned silence. What had started as a Wi-Fi reset had unearthed something much darker. His privacy had been violated. His life watched, and all while people like Karen focused on the color of his skin, not the truth of his situation. But the worst part was still to come. Because the next morning, as police searched Dan Keller's residence, they'd uncover files, footage, and hidden records that would turn the entire neighborhood upside down. By the time the sun rose the next morning, a full-scale investigation was underway. The police had a warrant in hand, and a quiet, gray bungalow on Whitmore Lane, just 2 blocks from Malcolm's home, was about to become ground zero for one of the most shocking discoveries in the neighborhood's recent memory. Dan Keller wasn't home when the officers arrived. His car was gone, and neighbors said they hadn't seen him in days. But once the door was unlocked and investigators moved inside, what they found made even the seasoned officers pause. The house was practically empty. No furniture, no family photos, no signs of life. But the basement told a different story. Down there, tucked behind a false wall, was a room filled with screens. Multiple monitors glowed softly in the dark, displaying grainy footage of various houses in the neighborhood, front porches, garages, even living rooms. Some of them were labeled by address. One feed was clearly marked 107 Abhorne, Malcolm's home. The recording timestamp matched the previous evening. Dan had been watching in real time, and he wasn't just watching. Labeled folders on a hard drive revealed names, access logs, passwords, financial records, even work emails. Some of the folders contained sensitive corporate data, likely stolen from Malcolm's consulting work. Others had surveillance stills of neighbors, undressed, unaware, and completely violated. This wasn't just spying. It was predatory, calculated cyberstalking. It was a digital invasion with real-world consequences. At the police station, Malcolm was called in to review the footage and confirm what he could. He sat down in front of the screen and froze when he saw himself. Brushing his teeth, typing on his laptop, even sitting shirtless on his couch, thinking he was alone. "They've been in my life without me knowing," he muttered. "This guy, he's been watching everything." The detective nodded solemnly. "We've already contacted federal cybercrime. This is bigger than just you. Multiple houses were tapped, some with children." Malcolm turned his head. "And Karen, she thought I was the threat." Back in the neighborhood, the news had started to spread. It didn't take long for Karen to hear. She stood in her backyard, staring blankly at her phone as the breaking news clip played. Local man Daniel Keller is being sought for questioning in a massive illegal surveillance operation targeting multiple households across the county. His home contained dozens of hours of footage from private residences, and early reports suggest he may have installed devices while working as a property manager. Karen's mouth fell open. The man she'd ignored, the man she'd accused, the man she'd called the police on, he had been the victim all along. Meanwhile, the community was reeling. Residents held impromptu meetings, trying to understand how it had happened. How could one man have done so much, under everyone's noses? Malcolm was approached by neighbors he'd never spoken to before. Some offered apologies, others brought baked goods or support. But Karen, she avoided him for days. Then, one afternoon, she knocked on his door, slowly, hesitantly. Malcolm answered, arms folded. He didn't say anything. Karen swallowed hard. I came to say I'm sorry. I misjudged you. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood, but really, I wasn't seeing clearly." Malcolm stared at her. "You called the cops on me because I was black. That's the only reason. You never spoke to me. You never asked who I was. You assumed." She looked down, ashamed. "I did, and I was wrong." There was a long silence. Then Malcolm said, "You weren't just wrong, you were dangerous. If I hadn't stayed calm, if those officers had reacted differently, you could have cost me my life." Karen's eyes welled up. "I know, and I'll never forgive myself for that." He didn't say another word. He simply closed the door. Later that night, as Malcolm sat in his office, now being professionally swept for bugs, he thought about how close he'd come to becoming just another name in the headlines. Not for what he did, but for what someone assumed he was. And still, the worst revelation was yet to be made public, because when the digital forensic team finally cracked into the encrypted backup drive found in Dan Keller's crawl space, they found something that would shake the entire state, a client list of people who had paid for access to those surveillance feeds. Names of local business owners, community leaders, even someone running for public office. Malcolm wasn't just the victim of a tech-obsessed creep. He was the target of a network. And now, the fight wasn't just about privacy. It was about justice. When the encrypted drive was finally cracked, it didn't just open a door. It kicked down a wall. What started as one man spying on his neighbors turned into a web of corruption, privacy violations, and secrets that exposed some of the most respected people in town. Malcolm hadn't just stumbled into a crime scene. He had been living inside one, unaware that the enemy wasn't just outside. It had been looking right through his walls. The file names were coded at first, but with cross-referencing metadata and recovered IP logs, it became clear Dan Keller had not acted alone. He had been selling live access to these home surveillance feeds to anonymous buyers. some of whom turned out to be shockingly local. A well-known local real estate agent, a retired judge, the CEO of a regional security company. Even a sitting city council candidate was named in the log files. Some had paid for access to watch specific families. Others had watched Malcolm's home daily, for months. Each new name brought fresh outrage. Media trucks flooded the area. Community outrage grew louder. The same people who had once dismissed Malcolm now asked him for statements, interviews, appearances. But he wasn't interested in becoming a media figure. He didn't want to be a symbol. He just wanted to be safe. FBI agents were brought in. Arrests followed. Lawsuits erupted. And Dan Keller, he was eventually found hiding in a cabin 3 states over, using a fake name and cash. He was arrested without incident, and he was silent through most of the interrogation until asked why he'd watched Malcolm so closely. His only answer: he made it easy. When Malcolm heard that, he sat alone in his darkened living room for hours. Easy. That word haunted him. Easy because he was quiet, because he didn't complain, because no one would believe a black man in a quiet, white suburb was the victim. He thought of Karen. She had released a formal apology, public, teary, and carefully worded. But the neighborhood wasn't quick to forgive her. She stepped down from the HOA, stayed indoors, and declined all interviews. A few weeks later, Malcolm's doorbell rang again. This time, it wasn't Karen, it was Officer Carter, the older cop from that day, now in plain clothes. He held a sealed envelope. "Mr. Warren," he said, "we thought you might want to see this. We recovered it during the sweep. It's from Dan's personal files." Malcolm opened it slowly. Inside was a single printed photo, taken from one of the hidden cameras. It was a picture of him smiling on a Zoom call with his niece, holding up a book he'd been reading to her. The moment felt innocent, warm, yet knowing it had been secretly watched turned it hollow. "Why would he keep this?" Malcolm asked. Carter shrugged. Maybe he liked watching. Maybe it made him feel powerful. Or maybe you reminded him of something he could never be. That night, Malcolm stood in front of his mirror and stared at his reflection. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel fear. He didn't feel powerless. He felt clarity. He bought new security systems, set up encrypted protocols, and started sharing his story. Not on the news, but at local schools and tech talks. He educated others about privacy, surveillance, and racial profiling. Slowly, he turned his pain into purpose. He didn't do it for fame. He did it because people like him were so often misjudged, underestimated, and erased. Unless someone stood up and said, "This happened, and it matters." Weeks turned into months. Malcolm kept working, living, rebuilding his peace. Some neighbors became friends. Others remained awkward and distant. But the cameras were gone. The eyes in the walls were gone. And Karen, she moved away. Her house sold in silence. No goodbye party, no farewell brunch, just a U-Haul and a long, quiet drive out of town. One Sunday, Malcolm was walking his dog past the community center when a young boy rode up on his bike. "Hey," the boy said. "My mom said, you're the Wi-Fi guy." Malcolm chuckled. "Yeah, something like that." "She said you helped catch the bad man." "I didn't catch him," Malcolm replied, smiling. "I just didn't back down." And that's the truth that lived on. Not the headlines, not the arrests, but the quiet courage of a man who refused to be erased, who held his ground when everyone else looked away. Who turned suspicion into truth and fear into light? Because sometimes all it takes is one moment of injustice to expose years of hidden darkness. And sometimes the one they underestimated is the one who saves everyone. If this story moved you, taught you something, or made you think differently, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Live truths, real stories, real voices, real change.